He addressed Lily's father about her time in the service. You find it concerning, music. Do you not? It's not good for her, Lily's father, Mark, mumbled, refusing to look at his daughter or his former mother-in-law, filling her head with fantasies. Music. She's an old woman. She gets confused. Velma's posture didn't change. Her hands wrinkled and showing the faint blue of veins rested calmly in her lap. Rathian. She simply watched, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. Davies turned his attention to the judge. Your Honor, my client's concern is for the child's stability. We have a grandmother, a lovely woman, I'm sure. He gestured magnanimously toward Velma, who is allegedly regaling her granddaughter with tall tales of being, of all things, a United States Marine. We believe this demonstrates a tenuous grasp on reality, one that is not conducive to a stable environment for a young girl. The judge, a man named Harris, who looked as tired as the room felt, sighed. Get to the point, Mr. Davies. The point, Your Honor, Davies said, his voice rising with theatrical flair, is that these are delusions, dangerous ones. Lily has been telling her friends at school, getting into arguments. She claims her grandmother was some kind of war hero. It's a fantasy that needs to be curbed, and it speaks to the general fitness of Mrs. Harding as a guardian. He paused, letting the accusation hang in the stale air. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Velma Harding to the stand. A ripple of unease went through the small gallery. Judge Harris looked at Velma. Mrs. Harding. Velma rose with a slow, deliberate grace that seemed at odds with her age. She walked to the stand, her low-heeled shoes making no sound on the worn linoleum. The red jacket was a beacon. As she passed the bafe, a burly man in his late 50s with a faded navy tattoo partially visible on his forearm. He instinctively straightened his posture. He couldn't have said why. It was just a reaction to her bearing. She settled into the witness chair, adjusted the microphone, and waited. Mrs. Harding, Davies began, circling like a shark that smelled blood. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's clear this up for the court. You've been telling your granddaughter, Lily, that you served in the United States Marine Corps. Is that correct? I have told her about my life. Yes, Velma's voice was quiet, but it carried a strange resonance in the silent room. It was a voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. And your life as you tell it includes being a Marine, Davies pressed, a smirk playing on his lips. With all due respect, that's quite a claim for a woman of your generation. Things were different back then. Women didn't exactly storm the beaches of Ioima, did they? A few people in the back chuckled. The judge shot them a glare. There are many ways to serve, Velma said evenly, her eyes locked on Davies. Of course, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Perhaps you were a clerk, a secretary. A noble profession to be sure, but Lily seems to be under the impression you were some kind of commando. More snickers. Lily buried her face in her hands. I was an officer in the Marine Corps, Velma stated. The words simple, unadorned, and solid as granite. Davies's smirk widened. An officer. My. And do you have any proof of this extraordinary claim? Discharge papers. Perhaps a DD-214. My client's discovery requests found no record of a pension. No VA benefits being claimed under your name. It seems odd. Paperwork gets lost over the decades, Velma replied, her calm infuriating him. And I have never felt the need to ask for anything I was not given. How convenient. Davies sneered. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the witness box, invading her space. You see, Mrs. Harding, the problem is your stories are affecting your granddaughter. You're teaching her to lie, to live in a fantasy. My client simply wants his daughter back in the real world, away from these war stories. He pointed to a small tarnished pin on the lapel of her red jacket. It was an eagle globe and anchor, the emblem of the Corps. The details were worn smooth by time. And what is this? A piece of costume jewelry you bought at a surplus store to sell the story. It's a nice touch, I'll give you that. Very theatrical. Velma's gaze flickered down to the pin for a fraction of a second. The lawyer's mocking words faded, replaced by the drumming of a cold torrential rain on a Paris Island barracks roof in 1977. She saw a young woman, her own face, rain-soaked and streaked with mud, her knuckles raw. She was pinning an identical gleaming new EGA onto the collar of another young woman, Private Jensen, whose face was a mask of exhausted triumph. The air smelled of wet earth and iron resolve. They were part of the first platoon of women to complete the exact same final phase of the crucible as the men. The pin wasn't a symbol of service. It was a symbol of a promise kept, of a barrier broken. She brought her focus back to the courtroom, her expression unchanged. "It was a gift," she said softly. "A gift," Davies repeated, tasting victory. "Your Honor, it's clear what's happening here. We have an elderly woman clinging to past fictions, creating a world of make-believe that is harming this child. She can't provide proof. She can't provide stability. She can only provide stories." He continued his assault for what felt like an eternity. He questioned her memory, her physical ability to care for a child, her finances. He painted her as frail, forgetful, and delusional. Through it all, Velma answered with a quiet dignity that seemed to enrage him further. She never raised a voice. She never broke eye contact. She simply sat there in her red jacket, an island of calm in a sea of manufactured outrage. The bailiff, whose name was Rick, had been watching the exchange with a growing sense of disgust. He'd spent 20 years in the Navy, most of it as a master-at-arms. He knew procedure, and he knew people. And something about this woman screamed authenticity. It wasn't just her posture. It was the economy of her movements, the way she surveyed the room without seeming to move her head, the quiet, unshakable confidence that radiated from her. Davies saw a frail old woman. Rick saw a commander on her throne. He'd heard her full name when she was sworn in. Velma Rose Harding. It didn't ring a bell, but when Davies mocked the pin, something clicked. He'd seen pins like that before, worn and burnished by decades of care. And the way she just absorbed the insults. It wasn't weakness. It was discipline. A discipline he hadn't seen in a long, long time. While Davies was grandstanding, making a passionate plea to the judge about the dangers of geriatric fantasy, Rick made a decision. He caught the eye of his partner, gestured that he was taking a break, and slipped out the heavy courtroom doors. He walked quickly down the marble hallway, the lawyer's voice still faintly audible behind him. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over his contacts. This was a long shot, a crazy idea. It was probably nothing. But if it was something, if she was who he thought she might be, letting this travesty continue was unthinkable. He found the number for the public affairs office at the nearby Marine Corps recruit depot. It was the only number he could think of. A young, cheerful Lance Corporal answered. "Public affairs, how can I help you?" "Yeah," Rick said, keeping his voice low. "My name is Rick Stanton. I'm a bailiff over at the county courthouse. This is going to sound strange, but I've got a woman in family court here. Name of Velma Harding. Says she's a Marine. The opposing counsel is tearing her apart, calling her a liar. I don't know. Something about her just doesn't sit right. She's got the bearing. Is there any way you can? I don't know. Look her up." There was a pause. "Sir, we can't just give out personnel information." I know, Rick said, frustrated. "Look, kid, I'm a Navy vet. Master-at-arms retired. I'm telling you, my gut is screaming at me. This woman is the real deal, and she's being publicly humiliated. Her granddaughter is about to be taken from her because this lawyer is painting her as a senile old fraud. Her name is Velma Rose Harding, born 1955. I think she said, 'Please just take a look.'" The Lance Corporal hesitated. The bailiff's plea, veteran to veteran, struck a chord. "Hold on." Rick could hear the click of a keyboard. He paced the hallway, the polished floors reflecting his anxious steps. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Davies was probably going in for the kill right now. The voice that came back on the line was not the cheerful Lance Corporal. It was deeper, harder, and laced with an urgency that made the hair on Rick's arm stand up. "This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole. To whom am I speaking?" "Rick Stanton, Court Bailiff. You said her name is Velma Harding." The Master Gunnery Sergeant asked, his voice tight. "Yes, long grey hair, red jacket." There was another pause, followed by a muffled, "Holy Mother of God." Then directly into the phone. "Mr. Stanton, what courtroom are you in?" 3B. "Judge Harris, keep them there," the voice commanded. "Do whatever you have to do. We are on our way." The line went dead. Rick stared at his phone, his heart pounding. It wasn't just something. It was something big. He walked back into the courtroom just as Davies was delivering his closing remarks. The air was thick with impending doom. "And so, Your Honor, for the safety and well-being of the child, we ask for an immediate change of custody and a court-ordered psychological evaluation for Mrs. Harding to assess the full extent of these delusions of grandeur." Back inside the Public Affairs Office, the Lance Corporal was staring wide-eyed at his Master Gunnery Sergeant, who was already striding toward the base commander's office. Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole didn't knock. He opened the door and stood at attention. Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man in his late 40s with the lean, hungry look of a career infantry officer, looked up from his paperwork, annoyed. "What is it, Master Guns?" "Sir, you need to see this." Cole laid a printout on the polished desk. Thorne picked it up, his eyes scanning the first few lines. His annoyance evaporated, replaced by a look of disbelief, then dawning comprehension, and finally a cold, hard anger. He read the name first. Harding Velma, R. Colonel USMC retire. Then he saw the billet history. Officer Candidate School 1976. The Basic School 1977. First female officer assigned as an S2 for an infantry battalion. Marine Security Guard Detachment Commander. Beirut 1983. Operations Officer. 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. Operation Urgent Fury. Commanded a training battalion at Paris Island. Senior Intelligence Officer for the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force during Desert Storm. Then came the awards, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star with a Combat V, the Combat Action Ribbon, the Meritorious Service Medal with 2 gold stars. Thorne looked at Cole Beirut. She was at the embassy. "She was the detachment commander, sir," Cole said, his voice low. "She pulled 3 of her Marines out of the rubble herself after the bombing. That's where she got the Bronze Star." Thorne's jaw tightened. He stood up, his chair, scrapping back. He looked at the photograph stapled to the file. A young captain with piercing intelligent eyes stared back at him. The same eyes that were now framed by wrinkles and grey hair in a county courtroom. "This is Colonel Viper Harding?" Thorne asked. The legendary call sign spoken with a mix of reverence and shock. Every Marine officer knew the name. She was a ghost, a legend from a different era, one of the first women to break down the doors. They studied her tactical decisions from Grenada at the War College. "Yes, sir," Cole confirmed. Thorne grabbed his cover from its stand. "Master Guns, get my vehicle and find Sergeant Major now." He looked at the younger female captain working at a desk in the outer office. "Captain Jennings, you're with me." "Sir, you're going to see what a real Marine officer looks like," Thorne said, his voice a low growl. "And we are going to fix this right now." Back in the courtroom, Judge Harris was about to render his decision. The tension was suffocating. Lily was openly sobbing now, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt, of pain crossed Velma Harding's stoic face. She reached over and placed a reassuring hand on her granddaughter's knee. Davy stood with his arms crossed, a smug, satisfied look on his face. He had won. He had exposed the old woman's fantasy and secured custody for his client. It was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering. After reviewing the testimony, Judge Harris began his voice heavy with resignation. And in light of the questions raised about the stability of the home environment, he was cut off by the heavy courtroom doors swinging open with such force that they banged against the stoppers, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway stood 3 figures in immaculate Marine Corps Service Alpha uniforms. In the lead was a full-bird colonel, his chest a riot of colorful ribbons, his gaze sweeping the room with an intensity that made the air crackle. Flanking him were a sergeant major whose stern face looked like it was carved from granite and a young, sharp female captain. They moved as one, their polished shoes striking the floor in a synchronized rhythm that was less a walk and more a march. They ignored the gallery, ignored the lawyers, their focus entirely on the front of the room. The entire courtroom was frozen in stunned silence. Even the humming of the lights seemed to have ceased. Colonel Thorne did not slow his pace until he reached the bar separating the gallery from the court. He stopped, his eyes finding the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice a crisp commanding bark that was utterly alien in this setting. "Colonel Marcus Thorne, base commander. I must apologize for this interruption, but I have been made aware that a gross injustice is being committed against a decorated officer of the United States Marine Corps." Davy sputtered, "Your Honor, this is outrageous. I demand." Thorne's head snapped toward him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Counselor, you will be silent." Davies's mouth snapped shut as if physically forced. Thorne's gaze then moved to the witness stand where Velma Harding sat, her expression one of weary surprise. He took 2 more steps forward, stopped directly in front of her, and his back went rigid. He brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise it seemed to cut the air. "Colonel Harding," he said, his voice ringing with a respect that bordered on reverence. "It is an honor, A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Davies's face went from smug to confused to sheet white in the space of 3 seconds. Lily's father looked like he was going to be sick. Lily stared, her tear-filled eyes wide with wonder. Velma looked at the colonel, saluting her. A slow, sad smile touched her lips. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, the gesture of a commander accepting the respect of a subordinate. Thorne held the salute for a moment longer before dropping it. He then turned to the judge who was leaning over his bench, his mouth slightly agape. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice now a measured, controlled weapon. "The counselor here has questioned this woman's fitness. He has called her delusional. He has mocked her service. I am here to set the record straight." He held up the file he was carrying. "This is Colonel Velma Viper Harding. She was commissioned in 1976. She was the honor graduate of her class at the basic school. In 1983, while serving as the commander of the Marine Security Guard Detachment in Beirut, her post was bombed. She was buried in rubble for 3 hours. After digging herself out, she refused medical attention and spent the next 10 hours searching for her Marines, pulling 3 of them, 2 of them deceased, from the wreckage, with her bare hands. For this she was awarded the Bronze Star with a V for Valor. As Thorne spoke, the words conjured a ghost in the room. The quiet old woman in the red jacket began to transform in their minds. A quick searing image flashed through Velma's memory. The taste of concrete dust and blood. The crushing weight, the terrifying silence. Then the faint groan of a Marine trapped nearby. The searing pain in her own shoulder as she clawed at concrete and rebar. Her only thought to get to her people. The world was smoke and screams. And the smell of burning diesel. It was a hell she had walled off for 40 years, a memory that now stood starkly beside the image of a smug lawyer in a cheap suit. The counselor questioned her grasp on reality. Thorne continued, his voice dripping with ice. Her reality included running intelligence operations against Narat terrorists in South America. It included planning reconnaissance missions during the invasion of Grenada. It included serving as the senior intelligence officer for an entire Marine expeditionary force during Operation Desert Storm, where her analysis was credited with saving the lives of an entire battalion. He took a step toward Davies, who involuntarily shrank back. "You mock the pin on her jacket. That Eagle Globe and Anchor was earned at a time when women had to fight 10 times harder than men just to be seen as equals. It has been polished by the sands of Iraq, stained by the mud of Paris Island, and it bears witness to a career of honor, courage, and commitment that user could not possibly comprehend." The courtroom was utterly silent. The only sound was the quiet rustle of paper as the court stenographer tried to keep up, her fingers flying across the keys. The young female captain behind Thorne was staring at Velma, her expression a mixture of awe and hero worship. She was standing in the presence of a living legend, a woman who had kicked down the doors that allowed her to have a career, her fitness. Thorne's voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it seemed to fill every corner of the room. "This Marine has passed every test this country could throw at her. She has endured hardship and loss that would break lesser men. She has led Marines in combat. She has mentored generations of officers. The only thing she is unfit for, Your Honor, is to be in the presence of men who mistake quiet dignity for weakness and grey hair facility." He turned back to Velma. "The entire command staff sends its deepest respects and its profound apologies that you were ever subjected to this." Judge Harris finally found his voice. He cleared his throat, his eyes wide. He looked from the furious colonel to the pale-faced lawyer, and then to the quiet, dignified woman in the red jacket. "Colonel Thorne," the judge said, his voice full of a new, profound respect.